Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be in my Mockup Mayhem vlog series. It's been a little while since I filmed one of these and this one happens to be long overdue. I originally planned on making this several months ago and I'm really not sure what happened, but it didn't happen. This is pattern number 3305 and it is a McCall's printed pattern that was published in the 1950s. This pattern was surprisingly difficult to find. It seems like simplicity really took over the more casual garment market in the 1950s, and all of the McCall's and Butterick and Vogue patterns for blouses from this period were a lot more expensive. I think I paid $16 for this one, where there were dozens of simplicity ones available for closer to $6 or even $4 or $5. But at the time I purchased this and started this project, I wasn't allowed to use simplicity patterns, so I searched long and hard for McCall's one and ended up coming across this. Now this pattern has 8 pieces and it requires a little less than 2 yards of fabric, and it has 3 variations. So there is one variation with a bow at the front, there's one variation with a high collar, and then there's one variation with a cravat of sorts. I asked on Patreon and people voted for this one, which just so happened to be my favorite. But if this goes together easily and I like how it fits, I'd really like to make this one as well out of a Christmassy fabric. Specifically this Michael Miller deer print, which I just think is adorable. So I'm hoping I like this because I'd really like to be able to use this fabric before the holidays, and I don't have any other pattern that I think would be really suitable for it. And I could draft my own, but I'm trying to save my drafting skills for more elaborate things. And the actual final fabric for the variant with the bow at the front is going to be this very lightweight floral, which goes really nicely with both of the skirts I've already made for Sewing Through the Decades thus far. So I'm just going to go ahead and get the pieces out for this and get it laid out and ironed, and then we can work on making the mock-up. From now on, I think all of my mock-ups are going to be made out of muslin and proper material that is off a bolt and freshly ironed, and it's going to be great. I'm really trying to up my mock-up and drafting game a little bit and put some more effort into garments before I actually start on the garments. So hopefully these mock-ups will look a little bit prettier from now on. I kind of vaguely recall that this might have been missing pieces, but I don't know that for sure, so we'll just open it up and see. The envelope for this one isn't in particularly good condition, but hopefully the pattern will be okay. So it's definitely been used before since all of the pieces have been cut out with pinking shears, but it still looks very usable. It's funny, you can kind of tell which variation the original owner made, since some of these pieces actually haven't been cut out. So I'm assuming they just made one version of the blouse, and then they didn't bother to cut excess tissue paper off the piece they weren't using. And I kind of lost count because I was talking, but I think all of the pieces are there. So I'm going to go ahead and get these ironed, and then I can get them laid out. Okay, so I've just got everything laid out, and I'm starting to pin the pieces down. The particular variation that I/we/you have chosen only requires 4 pieces, which is awesome. That makes it one of the easiest variations, I think. And I took a little peek at the instructions, and they looked really intimidating. There were a lot more instructions there than there have been on the previous McCall's patterns I followed from this period. So I guess as we get further into the 20th century, they have less expectations for people's ability to sew, so they provide you with more information, which can actually make things more confusing sometimes. But we'll see how it goes. I've kind of learned not to judge instructions based off of a glance, because sometimes the instructions look really intimidating and it looks like there's a lot of instruction there that's going to be hard to follow, but it ends up being really nicely explained. So I'm not judging it too harshly yet, but I think it's definitely going to be a little bit more difficult than the skirt patterns I just followed, which were incredibly easy. I'm actually planning on following a few more skirts patterns just because I want to add a couple to my wardrobe. So that'll probably be a Patreon exclusive thing that you guys see soonish. I think that's enough pins, so now I'm just going to cut everything out. I specifically left my music off, so hopefully you could all enjoy the sounds of me cutting this out. And now I'm just going to go ahead and I think cut all of the notches and mark anything that needs to be marked. There are some kind of scary looking markings around the neckline, but I figured out that that's because you have to cut it lower to make the C variation, which is the variation that we're following. Since I'd like to use this pattern for other variations in the future, I'm just going to use a Sharpie to mark that neckline, and then I will cut the fabric down, but not actually cut the pattern down. So that will be the next step. And I guess I'll start with this piece because it looks the most complicated. So I've gotten everything cut out and I've gotten everything important marked. However, I've decided that I'm going to cheat a little bit on these tie panels, which are used to create the bow effect. For the real thing, I'm going to be hand sewing and hand hemming all of these edges. But for the mock-up, I don't feel like that's particularly necessary. So I'm actually just going to trim 5/8 of an inch off of all of the edges. So this is going to imitate the width that we'll have when it is hemmed properly, but I don't have to invest that actual effort into hemming it properly. I don't mind hand sewing things by hem. Hand sewing things by hem is the wrong way to say that. So now we have that, which should work as a stand-in, and then I can invest the 40 or so minutes into hand hemming the final garment. So now it is time to get the instructions out and to get to work. Okay, so these are the instructions, and the instructions for the pants and the skirts I followed from McCall's so far have all been half this size. They've been a single page, and then on the back they've had the instructions on how to cut, how to adjust, as well as the cutting layouts. And then on the other side they've just had a half sheet of instructions. So this is a little bit more intimidating at a glance, but there are also 3 variations for this pattern, so it makes sense that there would be more instructions. Now we are making view C, so I think we still have to follow the first couple instructions over here, maybe? It's not super clear. Yeah, I think we do. So I'm just going to go ahead and start by sewing the darts and the tucks and the seams. So there's a dart in the bust of the front pieces, then there are 2 tucks, and then at the back there are 2 tucks, and there's also a dart at the shoulder. So I'm probably going to match those up and sew those first, and then we can skip over to this and start attaching the ties and seeing how that goes. I'm also, you're not going to be able to see because of how I positioned the camera, but I've set aside all of the pattern pieces for this, but I have kept them out because with printed patterns, they often had instructions actually printed directly onto the tissue paper. So it's nice to keep them on hand when you're making something because sometimes that offers additional insights into the construction process. So now I'm just going to match up both sides of the darts, and I'm doing this a little bit roughly, not like ruffles, just like not precisely, because it's not going to affect the fit too much, but for the actual garment, you obviously want it to be really symmetrical. So those are the darts, which taper off into a point. Then these are the tucks, which are going to be left open-ended. I love the use of tucks and darts on 1950s pieces. I feel like in the 1960s a lot of things were pieced, and then it kind of breaks up the pattern of whatever fabric you're working with, and it makes it a little bit more fussy to put together, whereas the tucks are just a really easy, awesome alternative. Alright, so the sleeves look a little bit more fiddly than I was expecting. There's something involving a facing just so you can get it to turn outward properly, and it's going to take me a minute or 2 to figure out. So I'm going to ignore that for now and go ahead and sew all of the darts and tucks into these pieces. So I just gave everything a good iron, and then I pinned the front yoke and tie onto the front outside of the bodice. So basically what this diagram is showing here is what is going on here, and I'm really happy with how that works. The notches all line up, the markings all line up, and this will make a lot more sense when these edges are actually hemmed. So now there's no diagram for it, which makes it a little bit confusing, but it wants me to sew up the shoulder and the side seams. Specifically notches 1, 2 join shoulder and underarm seams of blouse, joining in front, yoke, and tie sections at shoulder seams as basted. Clip waistline curves, see sketch given for view A or B. So I guess it means this sketch, maybe? Something like that. So I'm going to pin the back panel on and get those seams stitched. So I just finished sewing up the shoulder seams, and then I was thinking about it, and I realized it would be a lot easier to sort out the facing before doing up the side seams, because now I've got all this space to work on the open garment, whereas once the side seams are done up, that will disappear and it will be flat, and I'll have to manage 2 layers of material. It's just going to be annoying. Also, do you hear my dog snorting in the background? Yes, you, Missy? You being playful? You're only ever playful when you want me to give you attention so we can go downstairs and cuddle. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm very happy that I figured this out because it definitely makes it a lot easier. So the next step is pretty much just folding the facing over at the center line of the bodice and matching up the notches that I didn't cut, and making sure that the tie is tucked out of the way so we don't accidentally stitch it down when we're sewing across this edge. Now, I have realized that there is a piece missing. I thought there was. I was almost sure of it, so I was really surprised when I didn't see one that was missing, but I must have just miscounted. So I'm actually missing the back neck facing, but luckily that is really easy to redraft, and I can just kind of ignore it for the sake of this mock-up and figure it out when I'm making the final garment. It's just the piece that's supposed to connect the two portions of the facing, and it's supposed to be stitched on before this step, but we're going to forego it this time around. I'm just going to trim half an inch off of this to kind of imitate the effect of the facing. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this and then do up the side seams and we'll see how it goes. I've noticed with a lot of patterns, both historical or vintage and modern, they tend to have you doing the collar and everything relating to it after you sew up the side seams, and sometimes even after you sew on the sleeves. And I hate that. I think they do it because it's easier to gauge the fit once everything else is done, but since I tend to make mock-ups, it just means that I'm making a garment that I know is going to fit in a less convenient manner. So I like finding little hacks like this, even if I'm kind of trying to follow the instructions. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew this and then sew up the side seams. So even though the back facing wasn't there, I just carried my stitching around the back portion, and now I'm just going to trim off just below that line of stitching to imitate the seam allowance that the back facing will eventually account for. So I'm just doing a quick little fitting, and I couldn't get my bow tied nearly as nicely as theirs was, but I think it looks pretty good. However, doing this has really made me want to use the deer fabric for this variation and then make the collar out of red velvet. I think that would be glorious. And then I could do the higher necked variation with the floral fabric. And that kind of goes against what you voted on, but not really, because I'd still be following the design you voted on. I would just be making it out of a different fabric. But I think this looks so cute and I love it so much, and I really think this would be adorable with the velvet collar with the deer print. So that's what I'm leaning towards doing now, and I think I'll do the higher necked version with the floral fabric. I just think it's going to lend itself a bit better to that. But I really like the shape of this. It's not looking too lovely out of the muslin, but it fits really nicely through the chest and at the waist and over the hips, and it fits pretty nicely in the back too. I don't know how the sleeves fit yet. I haven't done those, so I will do those now. But so far, I'm really pleased with this. It's nice making a blouse and not having to let it out anywhere, or shorten it, or take it in anywhere. So I'm very, very happily and pleasantly surprised. I was a bit confused how the sleeves worked because I knew it was supposed to have a cuff, but they were also referencing a facing. But I figured it out. They have room allowed for in the hem of the sleeves for both the facing and turning up the cuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew my sleeve pattern with a normal 5/8 of an inch allowance, and then I'm going to turn the bottom edge inward by 3 inches. That's what that looks to be to me. Yep, by 3 inches, and then I will turn it outward by 1.5 inches or so. And then these sleeves will be ready to be eased or gathered slightly to fit into the arm side of the bodice, and I can get them sewn on. I knew this was going too well. This project has finally betrayed me. So there's a mark on the sleeve that needs to line up with the shoulder seam. You can see it there. And then it says ease between notches. And ease usually means that you're just gathering the sleeve down enough that it will fit over the roundness of the shoulder. So it doesn't look visibly puffed or gathered from the exterior. Usually that means you're gathering like 8 inches of material down to 7.5 inches. So you can do that without creating the effect of a puffed sleeve. But here we have, I don't know, a good amount of material that needs to be gathered down, so the sleeves are definitely going to be visibly puffy, which is really not what you see in this diagram. So that's quite frustrating, but there isn't a lot that I can do about that. So I guess I'm just going to gather it, pin it, and we'll see how it looks when I'm done. So I didn't exactly take my time with that, so I can probably make this look a little bit nicer in the final thing, but there's no way to perfectly ease a sleeve like that to make it look as smooth as it does in the pattern images. There's like literally no way. I've done this technique many times before and it's usually worked out, but they just have way too much volume in the sleeves for the arm side provided to get that effect. So it is what it is. I don't personally mind the appearance of slightly puffy sleeves, but it's always frustrating when you can't make something look like the picture. So now I'm going to try it on. You might notice I only did one sleeve because I don't particularly like sleeves, but I know the shoulders fit me well and I should be able to gauge how the sleeves fit just from doing one of them. So I'd say that's a success, and I managed to tie the bow a little bit nicer this time too, though it's difficult to tell a difference. So I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. As I said, I think I'm going to switch it around, and I'm going to use the floral fabric to make the high neck variant, which I haven't made a mock-up of, but I probably won't, since I'm pretty sure if the rest of the blouse fits this nicely, then the collar will fit just fine too. And I'm going to use the deer fabric and some red velvet to make this particular variant, probably in a separate vlog. So I'm still going to be following the pattern variant that you guys voted on. I'm just going to be doing it a little bit differently. So I hope you guys don't mind, and I hope you enjoyed this video. So thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to all of you again very soon. And hopefully next time we'll be equally successful with our mock-up.